Hello, everybody, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I, of course, am just another heavy metal maniac, and today I am back once again with another video. I know it's been a minute, but nonetheless, I am back with a brand new video, and this time it is actually going to be a response video. So, this is going to be a response to a video recently put up by my good friend Levi, aka Thrashmaniac99. For those of you who are not aware of who this guy is, first of all, you're missing out on a great YouTube channel, but yeah, overall, he's just a great dude, great channel. He's very passionate about all things metal and all things wrestling. He's just a really, really awesome dude. I've done a bunch of live streams with him. I've done response videos to him before, so I believe this is actually my third response video to a thread of his, which is ironic enough because I'm actually going to be discussing bands whose third albums are their best albums. So I've previously kind of done videos like this. We're talking about bands whose debut albums were their best, which is actually one of the most popular videos on my channel, and bands whose sophomore albums were the best, which was also a thread put up by Levi. But I will say this, I feel like, is much more difficult than the other two because like bands whose first album is their best album or bands whose second album is their best album, like there are many examples that immediately come to mind for me personally for both of them. But as for bands whose third albums are their best, I personally found this list a little bit more tricky to kind of compile together, but nonetheless, I have compiled a list of 10 bands who, in my opinion, their third album is their magnum opus. Some of these choices are going to be pretty obvious for some people, I would say. A couple of others, these might be a little bit more controversial, but of course, this is my opinion. I would love to, if you guys disagree, of course, feel free to leave all your comments down below. Tell me what you think about all these albums, and leave your lists of bands who you think their third album is their best album down below as well, because I'd love to read you guys' comments about that stuff. But yeah, without further ado, enough of my ramblings. Let's just get right into this little thread, and we're going to be starting off with a pretty well-known band, and this might be a slightly controversial choice because really it's kind of a big debate, I would say, between this band's second album and their third album as to which is their best between the fans of this band. But my first choice for this video is going to be Rainbow and their album Long Live Rock and Roll. So of course this is their third studio album, just like all the rest of the albums on this list. And this is the final album to feature the legendary Ronnie James Dio on vocals, in my opinion, the greatest metal vocalist of all time, certainly in the top three at least. And yeah, like I said, I know a lot of people would say, oh, no, 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 Rising is the best Rainbow album. And that is completely understandable. Because Rising, don't get me wrong, Rising is an incredible album. The song Stargazer alone is just masterpiece. But in my opinion, I think Long Live Rock and Roll just ever so slightly outdoes Rising, because my opinion on Rising is the really amazing tracks on Rising are fucking like phenomenal. Like of course, I already mentioned Stargazer, Terror Woman, Run with the Wolf, all incredible songs. And then the other songs on that album, in my opinion, while they're still really good, they're just not as like they don't have the same wow factor in my opinion. They're not as good, even though they're still really really good. Rising is an almost perfect album. No, I'm not dogging on Rising at all. But for me, the quality between the individual tracks is much more consistent on Long Live Rock and Roll, because all of these songs, maybe minus the last track, Rainbow Eyes, which I don't dislike that song, but it is kind of a weak closer, I will say. But every other song on this album, like, of course, you have Gates of Babylon, Sensitive to Light, The Shed, Kill the King, which is just an incredible song. Tons of bands have covered it. That song's a classic. Of course, the title track, Long Live Rock and Roll. In my opinion, this is the best Rainbow album. I think that this is, in terms of Rainbow stuff, this is where Ritchie Blackmore was at his best in terms of just guitar work and, coming out with just amazing riffs. Of course, Dio is just an absolute powerhouse of a vocalist, and he gives his all on this album, and it sounds incredible. And really, for me, this is kind of also, in my opinion, like the last really good Rainbow album, because after this, of course, Dio left, and they definitely shifted their sound. They kind of stopped being metal, which I mean, of course, I think the jury's still out on whether or not Rainbow is a metal band, even in the early stuff. But they kind of, obviously became much more of a kind of an AOR pop rock type band when they got like Graham Bonnet and then later Joe Lynn Turner to do vocals. But that's a whole another topic for another day. But yes, in my opinion, Long Live Rock and Roll is the best Rainbow album. All the songs I mentioned, I think, are absolutely incredible. And overall, yeah, I just absolutely love This album definitely one of my favorite '70s metal albums, whatever you want to call it, heavy metal or proto metal. It's an incredible album, and really, of course, again, a lot of people would probably say Rising is their best album, but in my opinion, Long Live Rock and Roll just ever so slightly outdoes it, just ever so slightly. We're talking like just by a nanometer here. All right, it's very, 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 very small difference. But yeah, that's my first choice. Rainbow, Long Live Rock and Roll. Second album on my list is another classic heavy metal album, and I feel like this one is definitely pretty much universally accepted across this band's fan base that their third album is their finest hour. I don't think many people are going to be too upset about me stating that, unlike some of the other albums on this list, which we'll get to. But today, so the album or the band that I'm going to be talking about next for my second choice is none other than Quiet Riot, and of course I'm talking about their third album, Metal Health. So, Quiet Riot, Los Angeles, heavy metal slash hard rock band. They're kind of another one of these early '70s or late '70s, early '80s bands that kind of skirts that fine line between being a hard rock band and a heavy metal band. But Metal Health is, for all intents and purposes, a pretty legendary album. Like even if you're not a metal fan, you know at least two songs off this album. Of course, "Come On Feel the Noise," the cover of Slade, and the song "Bang Your Head," which of course was featured in the Footloose soundtrack. Like this album was absolutely huge. This was definitely a landmark, groundbreaking album for, classic '80s heavy metal, and also one could argue it is glam metal too. Like Quiet Riot definitely paved the way for bands like, like Rat or like Winger to really blow up in popularity because a lot of bands definitely tried to, capitalize on the same kind of sound that Quiet Riot captured with this album. But in my opinion, this is just an essential '80s album. Like in terms of just like that classic '80s heavy metal sound, heavy metal, hard rock, glam metal sound, because it kind of does have its feet in all three of those camps. Like there's so many classic songs all of them. Like of course I already mentioned the two big songs, which are, even though yeah they are both definitely overplayed in today's market, I would say I still have a big soft spot for both of those songs. Of course, you have other songs like Slick Black Cadillac, Run for Cover. Love's a Bitch is a really kind of a dirty, nasty song. Definitely one of the more heavier songs on this album. Let's Get Crazy. Yeah, just, great riffs. Kevin Dubrov, or Dubrov, however you want to say his last name, he definitely was a very interesting kind of vocalist. Like he kind of had that dirty, raspy kind of almost reminiscent of like kind of more classic hard rock vocalists like Dan McCafferty or stuff like that, because it just kind of had that kind of raspier, almost bluesier kind of sound, but with a little bit more of a metal bite to it, I would say. And yeah, for me, Metal Health, this is easily, without doubt, Quiet Riot's best album, because a lot of their other stuff, honestly, is just pretty forgettable. Of course, you have the first two albums featuring Randy Rhoads, which are, pretty decent, but then there's follow-up to this album, Condition Critical, was just kind of, well, I do like that album. I don't think it's a bad album. It is just kind of a weaker version of Metal Health, and obviously with so many lineup changes and stuff, and people in this band going on to different projects and passing away and what's not, they never really captured the magic of Metal Health ever again. So for me, this is definitely their best album. Again, I don't think it's going to be too much of a controversial pick because a lot of people really do love this album. But yeah, in my opinion, just another classic, essential '80s album. Metal or not metal, I absolutely love it, and I think this is absolutely their best album. And that's my second pick, Quiet Riot, Metal Health. For the third band on my list, we're going to move away a little bit from, well, I say move away a little bit, we're going to move away from like classic heavy metal and kind of proto metal stuff, and we're going to be talking about some doom metal. Doom metal is, of course, my favorite subgenre of metal. I love all things doom metal. And one of the big pioneers of doom metal, one of the so-called kind of big four, I see them kind of lumped in as, is Saint Vitus. And in my opinion, their finest hour is their third album, Born Too Late. Of course, this is the first album to feature the great Scott Wino Weinrich on vocals. And really, St. Vitus, for the most part, I would say, are a very consistent band across the spectrum. I love a lot of their albums. I am a big fan of their self-titled debut. I think that album is just an absolutely awesome song. Like the song Zombie Hunger and Burial at Sea alone is just, I love both those songs. Hallow's Victim is an amazing album as well. Yeah, overall, St. Vitus, minus just a couple weaker albums, I would say, they're a very, very consistent band. Again, one of the pioneers of classic doom metal. But for me, I feel like their sound really all came together on Born Too Late. I feel like this album is not only a classic, excuse me, in doom metal, but a classic album in just metal in general. Like it really just kind of perfectly captures the vibe and the feel and the spirit of classic doom metal, where it's very heavy. Like the guitar tone on this album is frankly just absolutely devastating and monstrous. Even by like the 1987 standards, I would argue this is just an absolutely monstrous guitar tone. Especially, you know, even though we had like death metal and black metal were starting to pop up during that time, this is just a heavy album. But it's not heavy in the same way as say a band like Death or Cannibal Corpse. It's heavy in the sense that yeah, it's weighty. You feel the weight of this album and just the emotion and the dreariness and just the kind of sadness and the overall just kind of like destitute vibe. Like this album has the feeling of just kind of a lonesome, you know, a hippie traveling on the side of a highway. You know, his glory days are long behind him. He's just looking for, you know, the next place to go and get drunk and try to forget that he lives on this planet. Just, you know, it's a miserable album, but it's miserable in a very good way. And of course, the lyrics touch on, you know, fairly dark subject matter, like, you know, kind of alienation, of course, alcoholism, addiction, and, you know, all sorts of other that fun stuff that we all love to talk about. But of course, Wino, I think, is just an awesome vocalist. I've always loved his more kind of bluesy country delivery that he brings to a lot of his songs, both in, you know, The Obsessed and St. Vitus and his other 10 million projects that he has. But his vocals on this album, I think, are really, really damn good. But again, just the thing that makes this album perfect for me is just the riffs. And if you want just perfect doom metal riffs, no, look no further than this album. Of course, you have the title track, which is an iconic song. Dying Inside is an amazing song. Clear Window Pane, Thirsty and Miserable, The War Starter, HAAG, Hag. I don't know if that's actually how you say it, but that's a killer song. Literally every single song on this album is just a perfect doom metal, almost anthem in a way. Like again, in terms of just that kind of early doom metal sound, where it's just that kind of real, alienated, kind of sad sound, miserable sound. This is the perfect album for it. And yeah, I love Saint Vitus. I love a good chunk of their material. But in my opinion, the best parts of this band all came together on Born Too Late. And so that is my third choice. Now let's move away from doom metal and talk about some death metal. So the next band I'm going to be discussing is one of the classic death metal bands, one of the staples to come out of the whole early Tampa scene, early Florida scene, and that band is none other than Deicide. And of course I'm talking about their third album, Once Upon the Cross. Now this is probably going to be one of the more controversial picks on my list because for most Deicide fans, I would say usually the two albums I see get brought up as the fan favorites are of course the self-titled and Legion, which don't get me wrong, I do love both of those albums. I think they're absolutely incredible. But in my opinion, the best of Deicide came together on Once Upon the Cross. For one, in my opinion, this is probably tied with Pierce from Within in terms of like the best Scott Burns production job. Like this album sounds absolutely incredible, even by like modern death metal standards. It sounds just crisp and clean, but also just devastating and evil. And there might be a bit of bias on my part because this was actually the first Deicide album I was exposed to. I heard the song Once Upon the Cross when I was probably maybe like 12 or 13 or something like that. And I was kind of almost scared by it a little bit because I was just like, oh my God, this sounds like genuinely like evil. And that's something I love about this album and just early Deicide in general is that they sound, you know, genuinely just kind of like evil and menacing and dark. But in my opinion, all the evilness really kind of came together on this song because these songs they're evil, but they're also very very hook laden. Like these songs, they're catchy, they're full of just awesome grooves and just, you know, great riffs, great drumming, cool bass lines that pop up every now and again. Glenn Benton, in my opinion, modern day vocals, he's not necessarily the greatest in my opinion, but or his early days, he was a phenomenal vocalist, and I love his vocal performance on this album. Again, very just menacing, evil death metal on this album. Of course, I already mentioned the title track Once Upon the Cross, which is definitely my favorite track on this album, but other songs like When Satan Rules His World, They Are the Children of the Underworld, Kill the Christian, Confessional Rape, again, the production of this album really lets these songs stand out. Again, you can hear everything that's going on, and I really love that about this album, but of course, again, it's a perfect blend of, yes, evilness and groove, and basically kind of the best elements of 90s Floridian death metal, all compiled into one album. Not really so much like kind of the more melodic tinges that you get with some later albums, but again, just in terms of like catchy, very memorable, standout death metal, I think this is an absolute gem of an album. And yeah, this will probably always be my favorite Deicide album. Again, definitely a little bit more of a controversial pick for some people because, again, the first two albums I know are absolutely beloved, as well as Stench of Redemption, which, don't get me wrong, those albums are fucking incredible too. But for me, Once Upon the Cross is Deicide's finest hour. And I have one more death metal band I'm going to discuss for this video before we move on to a couple other subgenres. And this is probably going to be the most controversial pick on my list in general, I would say, because for this band, they have quite a few albums I would say are pretty beloved by a lot of people, but I think my thoughts on this band are pretty well established on this channel, so I'm prepared to get some negative comments if they ever do come my way. But the band I'm going to be talking about is none other than Carcass, and of course their third album is Necroticism, Discanting the Insalubrious. I hope I said that right. I know I fucked up Necroticism, but whatever. So Carcass are, of course, they really almost don't need any introduction. They are one of the pioneers of not just death metal, but also gore grind and grindcore, death grind, melodic death metal, old school death metal. They really have kind of dipped their toes across the whole death metal spectrum. But in my opinion, their finest album is Necroticism. Why? Well, for one, for me, it is a massive, massive improvement over the first two albums. I don't like Recaputrefaction at all. It's yeah. I can I can respect it for being hyper influential, but I don't like that album. It sounds like shit, and the songs are not that good in my opinion. Symphonies of Sickness was an improvement, but it still really is not an album I find myself going back to very often, if at all. But Necroticism is where they kind of completely, shed the grindcore, gore grind elements and just fully embraced being a old school death metal band. Like and yeah, which not in yeah, this is old school death metal done very very well. But there's it's not just old school death metal. There's also this is where they start exploring the more technical approach. This is where they start exploring more melodic passages, and of course on Heartwork they became a full-blown melodic death metal band, which I think my thoughts on Heartwork are pretty well established. I don't dislike that album, I just think it's kind of overrated, and I think Necroticism just kind of pulled off that sound better, because again, this is just a kind of a grimy, gross album, like especially with the samples on this album. Like it honestly kind of still has the vibe of like a gore grind album, but with much more technical and much more proficient and much more matured instrumentation and much better vocals, in my opinion too, because of course you have Jeff Walker's very very iconic, just like snarling vocals, and he sounds absolutely nasty on this album. And yes, pretty much all of my favorite Carcass songs, honestly, are on this album, like Corporal Jigsaw Quandary, Incarnated Solvent Abuse. That might be like my favorite Carcass song of them all. Like I think that song is just absolutely incredible. But yeah, in my opinion, even though of course all the lyrics are still very gory and gross or whatever, to me this honestly is maybe their most like mature album, because after this, again going full blown like melodic death metal, which could be seen as maturing to some, but to me is kind of, I don't know, it's not necessarily it's less mature. It's just a different type of sound. Necroticism, in terms of just that old school death metal sound, I think is an almost perfect album. It's definitely the Carcass album I personally return to the most. Again, I'm not like a Carcass super fan like a lot of people for sure are. I don't, bow down to Carcass like a lot of people do. I do respect them a lot, but I don't love them like a lot of people do. But if there is one Carcass album that I am pretty much always in the mood to listen to, it is going to be Necroticism. So the next album on my list, we're going to move away from death metal and talk about some black metal. And this is actually the first album that I thought of for this video, because this is like the first choice that immediately jumped out at me. It's like, oh yeah, that's probably the most obvious pick I could think of right off the bat. And the band we're going to be discussing right now is Sargeist, and we're going to be talking about their album Let the Devil In. So Sargeist are, of course, one of the titans of Finnish black metal. They sit right alongside other bands like, of course, Horna, Satanic War Master, Beherit, Behexen, Impaled Nazarene, just in terms of embodying the whole vibe and feel of Finnish black metal. Sargeist are definitely one of the big pioneers for sure. And in my opinion, their best album is Let the Devil In. Again, probably not a very controversial pick because this album is revered across the whole black metal community, and it's not hard to see why. This album is honestly a flawless black metal album. If you're looking for just a perfect black metal album, look no further than Let the Devil In. Because if you want black metal that is very cold and very evil and very menacing sounding, but also chock full of fucking riffs, this is your guy. The production of this album has always been kind of interesting to me because it's not super raw or super, under polished. Like it's very it is a bit more on the clean side, and you can actually hear like the bass and stuff, which is kind of interesting, but it's still not like it's not like overly polished, like, oh, this sounds like a modern, like, deathcore album or whatever. Like it still has that kind of raw black metal feel that's needed for an album like this. And honestly, I think the production on this album is perfect because if this album had production like, say, Satanic Black Devotion or any other Sargeist album, I feel like the songs just wouldn't really hit as hard. Like, but giving these songs a kind of a bit more of a slightly cleaner production kind of gives them a bit more, like, giving the songs more clarity. It gives them more moments to stand out, more moments to just jump at you, and really let these riffs just, get in under your skin and just like fester in there, because that is what this album will do. These riffs, they'll just crawl all over you, and they'll, bury themselves in your skin, and they won't leave, and you don't want them to leave because even though it's a gross analogy, these are just damn good riffs. Of course, From the Black Coffin Layer is like a classic black metal song. Yeah, of course, other songs like Empire of Suffering, Twilight Breath of Satan, Spell to Awaken the Temple, Sanguine Rituals. Yeah, this whole album is just chock full of nothing but riffs and evilness and coldness and, dare I say, almost kind of epicness in some spots. Like, it doesn't go full bore, like, summoning-esque epic black metal, but there's definitely moments in here that I would say teeter on almost being kind of epic. Not as, just, they kind of have a scale, but it's almost like it's like watching a satanic ritual, like watching Satan rise up from the flames, but in a cellar. Like, it's not, it definitely has got a scale, but it's a more subdued scale than something like, say, Dimmu Borgir or, Summoning or stuff like that. And for that, I absolutely love this album. Like, yeah, Sargeist, I mean, I think are just a fantastic band overall. I love all their albums. I love their latest album as well. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Shoutrog and Werewolf, those two guys are kind of like the whole Finnish black metal scene, if we're being honest. But yeah, Let the Devil In, classic black metal album. If you somehow have not heard this album and you're just looking for evil, cold, but riffy black metal, this is the album for you. Let's take a moment to talk about some more black metal, although definitely a very different kind of black metal. We're going to be going from Finland now to Switzerland to discuss the band Samael and their third album, Ceremony of Opposites. Samael are a very interesting band that have a very interesting evolution throughout the course of their career. They started off as kind of a much more straightforward, like Celtic Frost worshipping style black metal band with their first two albums, Worship Him and Blood Ritual, which I do love both those albums. Like, again, in terms of just that early kind of transitionary sound between like the first wave and the second wave of black metal, those are both absolutely classic uh, albums. But by the time you get to Ceremony of Opposites, they definitely have started to shift their sound. Oh, excuse me, I don't know why I'm so burpy today. But by the time you get to Ceremony of Opposites, they have definitely started to shift their sound quite a bit. This is where they started to throw in more industrial elements, and this is where they start to kind of trim down the songs a little bit. And this honestly is one of the catchiest black metal albums I think ever made. Like, this is kind of like the transitionary album between, the early Samael stuff and the later Samael stuff, where they kind of ditched being a black metal band entirely and went for full bore symphonic, like, industrial metal, which I don't mind. Like, I think some of the really good albums in later Samael stuff, like especially Passage is a really good album. But again, Ceremony of Opposites is it's such a unique album. Like, it's black metal, but it is also very catchy. Like, these songs will just legitimately stuck in your head, and you'll just be kind of like bopping your head, like, dude, this, like, he's like screaming about, like, Satan and stuff, but dude, these are fucking just catchy ass songs. There's the great use of like the industrial elements and the keyboards. Like, it doesn't go full bore, like super over the top, like extravagant or like super noisy industrial stuff. Like it perfectly finds that balance between that more kind of, you know, traditional first wave, second wave transitionary black metal sound and these more newer elements that they were starting to incorporate into their sound. And this is definitely their last sound that I would say kind of would fit into like more black metal realm, because by the time you do get to Passage, it is a very, very Samael becomes a whole different animal. But yeah, in my opinion, Ceremony of Opposites, it is Samael's best album, because again, I would argue probably the catchiest black metal album like ever made. I absolutely love this album, and yeah, I do love early Samael. I do like a lot of later Samael too, but if there is one Samael album that I'll pretty much, again, always be in the mood to listen to, it is going to be Ceremony of Opposites. Alright, let's talk about some thrash metal now, and this is another one that I don't think is going to draw much controversy or, you know, differing opinions, because this album, I think, is not only revered as one of the greatest thrash metal albums of all time, but also one of the greatest metal albums of all time, period. And that album is none other than By Inheritance from Artillery. So Artillery, Danish thrash metal crew, definitely I would say Denmark's biggest export, at least in terms of like thrash metal. And again, another very kind of interesting band that kind of has an interesting trajectory over the years. A lot of later Artillery is kind of almost power thrash, I would say. It's like almost comparable to like I'd say like newer Flotsam and Jetsam, where it kind of has it's thrash metal, but it kind of has those more power metal kind of type, you know, especially with the vocals, power metal elements kind of thrown in there. But you know, their first album, like Fear of Tomorrow, is pretty solid debut. Although I think they definitely got a lot better with Terror Squad, and then they got even better with By Inheritance, which yeah, By Inheritance, again, revered not only as one of the greatest thrash metal albums ever, but one of the greatest heavy metal albums ever in general. And yeah, it's really not hard to see why, because this, in terms of just like songwriting, this is such a beautifully crafted album. Like all these songs, like again, they're very thrashy, they're fast, they're intense, but they're full of these just amazing, you know, progressive, technical kind of songwriting flourishes. You know, stuff on here is honestly pretty comparable to other like progressive metal bands of the time, I would say. Although it's not maybe not as like technical or as progressive, but definitely, you know, very ambitious and just yeah, very well written songs. The vocals, which I forgive me, I do forget the name of Artillery's original vocalist, which he definitely has kind of a very unique delivery, but his vocals I feel like gel much better on this album than they do on say Terror Squad or the debut. And yeah, of course you have classic songs on here with just amazingly well written songs like you know, Co-Maniac, Beneath the Clay, Don't Believe a Word, or Don't Believe, sorry, not Don't Believe a Word, Back in the Trash. Pretty much just a flawless album, in my opinion. Well, okay, maybe the Razamanaz cover is kind of goofy, but other than that, this album is just an absolute classic album. Like, again, if you are any thrash metal fan worth your weight in salt, you already should know this album. If you don't, shame on you. You need to listen to this album right away, because if you love stuff like, I would say, definitely like kind of late 80s Metallica, like And Justice for All, Master of Puppets era, Metallica, if you love stuff like Megadeth, or even stuff like, say, Dark Angel or Coroner, I feel like you'll get a big kick out of this album. So yeah, By Inheritance, one of the best thrash metal albums ever made. Maybe even in my like top 15 best thrash metal albums ever made, or my personal favorite. I love this album. It is easily, in my opinion, their best work, By Inheritance from Artillery. Right, and now we are down to our final two choices, and they are both going to be sludge metal bands. So kind of circling back into doom metal a little bit, although definitely a very different style of doom metal than Saint Vitus. And we're going to be talking about a first band, obviously. And the first band is one of the pioneers of sludge metal, one of the huge pioneers of the NOLA sound. And that band is none other than I Hate God and their third album, Dopesick. So I Hate God, of course. If you are a sludge metal fan worth your weight, you already know everything there is to know about these guys. They are, like I said, one of the pioneers of sludge metal, one of the pioneers of the whole early NOLA sound, right alongside bands like, you know, Crowbar, Down, you know, all those other bands. But yeah, in my opinion, the best I Hate God album is indeed Dopesick, their third album. Now, Dopesick, in my opinion, is really just an absolutely essential sludge metal album, because really this album is kind of just, I don't know, this album is just so hateful and angry. And that's, of course, I Hate, consistent throughout all of I Hate God stuff, is just they're angry, they're pissed off, they're miserable, they're all addicted to drugs, they're all dying from police brutality or hurricanes or whatever the hell is going on in Louisiana. But Dopesick really is just honestly, probably, in my opinion, the angriest I Hate God ever sounded, which is kind of a bold statement, but god damn, this album is just pissed off. Like songs like literally My Name is God, I Hate You. Like the first opening track literally has I Hate You in the title, and songs like Dixie Whiskey, Dog's Holy Life, yeah, every single song on this album. There's definitely a lot of, even though it is sludge and you get kind of the mixture of the hardcore and the doom like we get with other sludge metal bands like the Melvins and whatnot. There is a lot of crust punk influence on the song. Like I feel like around this time they were probably listening to a lot of like Discharge, maybe Doom, Aimbex, kind of a thing of all the big crust punk bands. There's definitely a lot of crust punk that they kind of threw into this album as well, which gives these songs just again that more intense vibe. Like this album is just one of the most hateful, pissed off albums I've ever heard, frankly. And I love all of I Hate God's albums. They don't have the biggest discography in the world, only 6 albums to date. And Take Its Name for Pain is also way, way up there for way, way up there for me in terms of like best sludge metal albums ever. But in my opinion, Dopesick is their finest hour because again, this is just one that angry. I cannot overemphasize how angry this album is. Like this album is out to hurt you and everything else around it. It's out to hurt itself more than anything, probably. Yeah, of course, Mike Williams just screaming unintelligibly, just give pissed off energy. Of course, you have the great mixture of like these hardcore bits that are just blasting and fast, and of course the amazing jazzy drum work that really kind of it lets you know that they're still rooted in that southern sound. Like they, even though they are very much a metal band, they're still a southern band. They love Leonard Skinner and shit, and all those fucking Allman Brothers and whatnot. Yeah, this is just an amazing, absolutely essential sludge metal album in my opinion. So for me, Dopesick is, in my opinion, the best I Hate God album. But again, not an easy choice to make because I think most all of I Hate God's albums honestly are really damn good. So, but in my opinion, their best is their third one, Dopesick. And the final band we are going to be discussing today is yet another sludge metal band, not from Louisiana, strangely enough. These guys are actually from North Carolina, although you honestly probably wouldn't be able to tell where they're from because they do sound very, very NOLA-y. That band is Buzz Oven, and we're going to be talking about their third album, At a Loss. So, Buzz Oven are, like I said, they're from North Carolina. Of course, this is one of the many projects featuring the great Dave Dixie Collins, the madman of sludge metal, stoner metal, the guy who pukes on himself and shut up his own toe. Yeah, he is kind of a madman, but really that's why we love Dixie Collins on this channel. And yeah, this album, in my opinion, is really the best Buzz Oven release. And that's, again, not really an easy choice because I think Buzz Oven is a very consistent band across the board. But their first 2 albums definitely had a lot more, hardcore, a lot more crust punk influence. They're, again, very much kind of like if you took, like, say, like the Melvins and mixed it with more of that kind of doom and more kind of Discharge type stuff. The first 2 albums are definitely very much more in that realm, I would say. Whereas with At a Loss, it's still very much it's still got that crust punk kind of vibe to it, and it's still got that hardcore sound, but it's definitely a little bit more. Well, not to say necessarily subdued, because honestly, nothing about this album is subdued. This album is a manic, angry, pissed off album that is just screaming at the world and running around naked, shooting up heroin. That's pretty much the vibe I would describe this album: is running around naked, shooting up heroin in a swamp. And I can't see it right now, but y'all can see the album cover. It's up somewhere in the corner with a cross stuck in an alligator. How it doesn't get much more southern than that now, does it? But yeah, really, At a Loss, for me, this, again, maybe a bit of bias because this was the first Buzz Oven album I was exposed to. But, so that definitely does play a part in a couple of these albums, I would say. But, man, Buzz Oven, just fucking incredible sludge metal. Like, right off the opening track, At a Loss, with the sample from Taxi Driver, and just one of the meanest riffs I've ever heard. That amazing riffs. Course, songs like Plow and A Lack of, Kakila, Crawl Away. I love kind of how the dynamics between the songs. Like you have one song that's just fucking fast and punky as all hell, and then you have those songs that are slow and swampy and just like crawling through the swamp, and they sound amazing. I could go on and on about how much I love this album. Definitely in terms of like early '90s or mid '90s sludge metal. I guess this actually would be late '90s because it came out in '98. Regardless, in terms of that 90s sludge metal sound, this is definitely one of my favorite albums. I could go on and on about how much I love this album, but this video is probably getting a bit long anyway, so I'm just going to shut the hell up now. And yeah, that's pretty much going to conclude this video of mine of bands of whose third albums are their best albums. Again, much more difficult than with bands whose first albums or second albums are their best albums. And of course, like I said, this is a response to Levi, aka ThrashManiac99. I'll have a link to probably his channel down below, or his original video, or maybe both. So definitely go sub to him if you're not already. Great fucking dude. Levi, if you're watching this, you're the man, and I appreciate you, brother. And yeah, thank you so much for making this thread, because this was really, really fun to do. And yeah, my voice is getting kind of tired now, so I'm going to take a bit of a break. Again, I apologize for the lack of uploads in the past month. I've just been life shit's been crazy, but nonetheless, I will be back to uploading more videos. So please do stay tuned. And well, yeah, that's about it. I am just another Heavy Metal Maniac. I'll see you all sometime in the future. In the meantime, all of you take care and have an excellent day. So long.